Welcome to another session of the Learn Free discussion. Today, we've got the Jug of Controversy, which contains little snippets, little statements about home education that I'm going to pull out here, and then we're going to respond to them quickly and cover as much ground as possible to show you some of the bad arguments out there and just give you the lay of the land of the home education world and tell you our opinion about some of these statements. And maybe we can unpack some of these ideas in more depth in the future. But the idea is today to just cover everything, and so you can just enjoy it with us and hear about it. So yeah.
Okay, we can say we'll see what's a myth, what's not, and if we can bust any of these myths. Okay, so let's
great.
Go for it.
So we'll start by reading one. I must follow the CAPS curriculum. It's a myth. Okay, it's a myth.
Okay,
and there's not much to be said about this. I mean, it's basically it's not required. And that's about that there is to say to it. I mean, Christopher, you can maybe add one or two more things, but it's not required.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do think that it is required. A lot of people would like to do it. So there can be good reasons to do it. But I think that this is the biggest issue, most probably, of dispute between home educators and the Department of Education, is that home educators feel they should have freedom to choose the curriculum, and they feel that that's entrenched in the Constitution. And the department seems to have this idea that they're very keen to have essentially what they call one nation, one curriculum. We can maybe unpack in another video whether that's a good idea, whether it's a good risk strategy. I think COVID-19 suggests not, but we can unpack that in detail another time.
Yes. Not following a specific curriculum is sort of at the heart of home education, because at the heart of home education is this idea that you want to tailor the educational process to a specific child. So if for some specific child CAPS would work best, then do that for that child. But if there's a different approach that will work better, which might not even be following a specific curriculum, it might just be building some unique curriculum for this child, you can do that. So that's very important to realize. You have to do what's best for your child, and you don't have to follow any specific program. You can do what's best for your child, and that's sort of the beauty of it.
Yeah, and it's like Lego blocks. You do a lot of work with Lego and robotics. It's like Lego blocks. The world has changed. There's a lot of Lego blocks out there. You can put them together. There's a lot of different free online courses. So it's not as daunting, the idea of creating a curriculum specific to your circumstances. It's not as daunting as it was 20 years ago.
Yes.
Perhaps even when you started home education, it's not as daunting now than it was when it was then.
Okay, let's go for another one. Home education is for the rich.
So let's say, myth or not, I would say that it's a myth. And the reason that I say that it's a myth is that, in fact, I'm going to say it's a myth, and you can tell us why it isn't, because you've got a good example on this.
So
from your own experience.
Yeah, it's a myth. I know people who decided to home educate to save money, because it's sort of this, you can imagine there's like the diminishing return curve, right? So as you put more money into something, you can't get better and better. Let's say you try to get the best chocolate. You can pay like $1 million for a chocolate bar, but it's not going to be better than the one you pay 100 Rand for, or not much, right? So it's getting less payback, right? And sort of many people, and this is where what I believe, and what people who home educate around me believe, and what we have seen in practice, is that the amount of return on investment you can get for a home educational approach is much better for in the beginning than it's a school approach. So the fees that you would have to pay just to get uniform and to drive to school, those fees could directly go into educational resources and things like that for home educators. The only thing that's really important to remember is your time is also a resource. You could think of it that way, and that's sort of the one resource that you really need to home educate. So if you're in any case have time open to do that, or if you want to make time open to do that because you decided to do that for your children, that's sort of the big resource. If you've got that, then you can save a lot of money in other areas by using free resources, etc.
Yeah, and we could say that, for example, so a couple of points. I think the first one is that, so what you're talking about is an opportunity cost. So yes, home education can be very expensive on an opportunity cost level. If you could use your time in some other way, or want to use your time in some other way, it could in that sense be expensive. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's for the rich, because maybe the rich don't want to educate their children. And then I think so that's I think one key issue there. But I'll hand it back to you for something else, because the one that I wanted to think of went out my mind.
Yeah, so I think
anything else in terms of
just
costs?
To end it up is home education can cost a lot of different amounts, depends on how you approach it. and it's not specifically for the rich. There are many bands of people who home educate because, again, they can tailor the process to their children. And in the end, it's really about you deciding to put in the effort and put in the time to do that. And you can be, and people, you shouldn't underestimate how thrifty people can be and how efficiently they can use their resources. And home educators do that. I've seen that, and they can do a lot with the little they have.
And I've remembered the one that I wanted to add. So if you'll allow me to add one.
Yes, go for it.
It's also not always an issue of money. What you could do is you can barter your skills. So if you're a parent who's good at geography, you can teach geography to other people's children, and they can teach your kids maths and science. So you don't need lots of money. You just need a big network, or you just need to engage with a big network or community. And there is a very big network and community
which are willing to help each other. Yes.
Right.
Okay, let's go on. I think we got that one covered.
Let's move on.
Okay. Home educated children are sheltered from real life.
Okay, so are you sheltered from real life?
That's a myth.
Tell me.
That's a myth in the sense that this is not the kind of statement that you can make about any group of people. You can't say automatically that all people who are home educated, or all people in school are sheltered from real life or sheltered from something. You have to be more specific, right? So this is not possible to make such a statement. But what we can say is, are home educators more sheltered from real life? And I think this comes back to what you think of as real life, right? So if you think children should just have full access to anything that happens in the world, if it's specific movies that have content that which some people believe children shouldn't have access to yet, or certain addictive substances, things like that, you'd want your children to stay away from those things, especially when they're very young, right? So there are some things which would be the real world, which you don't want people to have access to. I mean, murder is part of the real world. Rape is part of the real world. It's all of those things are part of the real world. So yes, you'd want your children to be sheltered from those things. But as they grow older, you want them to grow so that they can engage with the wider world. And so you want them to not be sheltered from older people, not to be sheltered from the parts of the real world which they are at the age that they can engage with now. And so home education is better suited to engage people with the real world, because school is less like the real world than your house is, right? So school is a group of people in the same age group with some authority figures over them, right? That's not the real world. That's sort of sheltering you from the real world, and not just the bad parts, just like everything of the real world. It's just getting you to school. Home educating can shelter you from the bad parts of the real world if it's done right, and then it can have you interact with the other facets of the real world. Like, I had a chance to spend hours and hours, days with the guys who were building in our house when I was like 9, when they were building our walls, and seeing them building the brick walls and talking with them, seeing the interaction between the foreman and the guys working with him, and so there's lots of different kinds of interactions that you can have, which is the real world, which you would not have had if you were in school. So no.
So I think the point is that it really depends on how you define the real world. And I think, as you say, what people sometimes think about is they mean they mean the world out there. But the fact is that it's also part of the real world to wash dishes. It's also part of the real world to clean floors. It's part of the real world to make up your bed. So those are also all parts of the real world. And you've got to balance. And the more you've got to balance that with your schoolwork, your activities, etc., the more you are engaged in the real world.
Yes. Okay. So no, it can if it's done wrong, and so can anything else. But if it's done right, it can have you sheltered from the things that can really harm you, and teach you to engage with the things which are the real world in a better way than school can. Okay.
Well, and I think even more than that, I think just that what it can do is that by sheltering you early in the process, to some extent, obviously you can be more sheltered when you're younger. When a child must probably, when you're very young, you just need maybe your mom and your dad. And as you grow older, you need more people to have contact with. But the strength, your ability to deal with those outside pressures is increased by the strength of that initial foundation. So it also gives you that tenacity to deal with the real world.
Yes. Okay. Great. Let's go for the next one. Home educators aren't socialized. Well, this is leading right into this one we just talked about. So, as I said, school. Okay. Firstly, what is your definition of socialization, right? Socialization technically just means learning to interact with other people correctly, right? But you can so how is home education better or worse than school? So we can talk about this by saying, well, what is the goal of your socialization? So socialization could mean a bunch of Hitler Youth kids getting to know each other and being happy that they're in the Hitler Youth. I mean, they're socializing, right? And they're very happy in this
Right.
in their little group, right? So we have to be more specific about what is our goal of socialization. And we would say our goal, if we can define that goal, we can evaluate if home education good or bad at it. So let's define the goal. The goal would be to interact with people in the real world across all the different sets in the real world. So older people, younger people, professional people, and people working more hands-on, right? And all these different groups of people, you want to be interact with all of them, right? Because that is really valuable. If you can interact with people, you can learn from them, and you can help them, and they can help you, and you can enjoy their company. So, right, that's the goal of socialization. So, why would home education have worse or better odds of being successful at that than school? Well, schools, as we said, narrow range of age group. You're kept in your own age group, right? And usually your interaction with other age groups are sort of an enemy kind of interaction, right? That's sort of very normal. And the people above you are your authority figures, right? You have to listen to them. You can't tell your teacher you don't like your math book. You can't tell them anything. Some of them are better at engaging down, but the point is they're all in authority over you. And the rest are your peer group. And that's not a very good representation of the real world. That's not a good representation of what you want to be socialized for. And home education has more contact points. You can interact with older people, younger people, and if it's done right, you can make friends across many age groups. I have friends across lots of age groups that most people don't have, and that's because of the nature of the educational system or the place where you learn. So yeah,
we're an example of that.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
I think it relates also to what you were saying previously about the issue of just in the previous topic, we were talking about the issue of home educated, sheltered. So the issue is also that if you're dealing with the real world, then you're dealing with real world socialization. So
Yes.
Elon Musk uses this example of two ways of teaching. You can have a screwdriver, and then I can tell you what the screwdriver is, and I can show you all the tools that I need to take a car apart, and I can teach you what each of those tools are. Or you can take those tools and try and see how to take the car apart with them. And maybe you come up with a creative way of using one of those tools. It could be destructive. Let's say you might want to have adult supervision,
yes.
But to a certain extent. But the point is that you're experimenting with it. So what I'm saying is that if you're home educated and home educated kids are often very busy, if you have to open a bank, you can learn about opening a bank account, or you can go and have to open a bank account. You can learn about how to start a business in business economics, or you can actually, as you've done, start a business. And that's and that starting of a business requires all sorts of interactions, all sorts of socialization, which you would not be exposed to if I'm reading chapter 1 on how to start a business, and it says I'm going to have to meet the bank manager, and I'm going to have to do this.
Yeah, I mean, that's not very, it's really hard to remember. And it's another important point to quickly note to the people who aren't in the home education sort of communities, is these communities are larger than you think in many areas. For example, in Pretoria, it's quite large. And these people interact and do lots of things together. So we had a homeschool review, we had softball games. And when I was like, I can't remember how old I was, maybe 14, I was a member of the home education review. I didn't like I don't know if it's a review, an English word, I can't remember. It's like a show, like a musical,
singing
whatever.
and dancing.
Yeah, singing and dancing. And I did not want to do it. I was like, when my mom said we're going to do this thing, I was like, no way, I'm not going to do it.
We want that video. We want that video.
I didn't want to do it. I was so against it. But then I enjoyed it so much interacting with the other kids that the next year I actually wrote the story and was part of it. And it's not very good, but I had all the
If you want to see the video, make a comment. Okay, let's move on. Before we embarrass you.
So that's part of socialization, right? All the different interactions that you had to do that thing, like to build that whole system. So all of these kinds of things happen in home education too. Okay, cool. Next one.
You want the video.
Home educators can't go to university. I mean, this is a joke, right? I'm in university at the moment. My friends are in university. Yeah, so I mean, it's a myth.
Yeah, so thousands of home educators go to university. Some don't. there's a problem with that question. The question assumes that the end of education, inverted commas, is university. And that's not what it is. It can be many things. But if you are academically inclined and you want to go to university, there's no reason why home educators can't. It can be a little bit more difficult than if you're doing the National Senior Certificate, but it can also be a little bit more easier. So you could be doing subjects like, you could be doing something like Cambridge, for example, and do Cambridge A-levels, and you can actually be exempted from certain first university courses. So there can be, so the kind of difficulties and problems.
You have to get specific advice on it, but there are many approaches. And I did Cambridge, but you can do it in a different way. Some of my friends did GED. And so you just have to find out what's going to work for you. The point is you can do it. And that's about the end of it. Yeah.
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 And it swings and roundabouts. It's not as easy to get things recognized, but then there may be other benefits, and there are often other benefits to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Next one.
Okay, go for it.
The jug is giving us things to talk about. Home education is indoctrination. Okay, Christopher, what about you tell us what indoctrination is defined as? Because otherwise this is going to be a nightmare to talk about.
Okay, yeah, no, true. So let's just quickly talk about indoctrination. So what we're essentially saying, and maybe this isn't the best, I've actually spent some time, I should have maybe looked up the dictionary definition. But essentially,
well, let's just use the definition that people think of, right? Because that's what people mean by the word. They don't necessarily mean the dictionary.
Yeah. So what's the definition that we look at? Which is, I mean, I suppose the good, it's what's that law where everything on the internet gets down to Hitler eventually, right? So
every bad thing has been done by Hitler, right?
Every bad thing. So the point is that at any point the argument goes to a certain point, you can bring in Hitler. So let's bring in Hitler. So the example that everyone thinks about is the Hitler Youth, right? And that would be example of indoctrination.
Yes, a very good example of indoctrination.
A very good example. And in fact, that was the whole point of the Hitler Youth, right?
Yes.
And that's the whole reason lots of people fought the Hitler Youth, because they knew that their kids were being indoctrinated. But essentially, what is the difference is that, let's use a simple example and say, education is being led to think for yourself. Indoctrination is someone else has done all the thinking, and they're kind of pouring it into you, and you're supposed to be an empty vessel that receives that. Whereas education is something that says, how do I help you? From educare to lead, how do I lead you to greater knowledge?
And so I think this is where I could just ask those who have been in school and are in school to just think about their schooling experience and think about how often they were just told, this is how it is, especially, I mean, I've heard this frequently from my friends who are in school. This is just how it is, and no explanation given. This is accepted as it is. There's no explanation. And I understand when someone can't explain something, they'll say, well, I'm not exactly sure, but this is how it is. I know it's true, but I don't know exactly how that happens. But if that's like the rule, if you can't ever challenge anything and try to say, but I don't understand this and I don't think this is true, you can't do that in school. In most schools, you can't do that. It's frowned upon, to say the least, right? And home educators, many of them, they approach their children in the way where they say, interact with me about this. Let's try to see why this is true. Let's engage on this. Like my mom usually jokes and she says she wishes she had never taught me to talk, because as soon as I could talk, I was debating her about everything. And she didn't just tell me shut up, right? She obviously sometimes if I was debating about my bedtime or whatever when I was like a little kid, she said, no, just go to bed. But like about things that are actually educational, she would interact with me and I could learn. Yeah. That way.
So let's just, I think also something about, and that goes back to the Hitler Youth example. It's also, indoctrination's got to do with power structures. And the fact is that home education, so let's say a couple of things. So one is that not every school is like that. There's a lot of experiments now with schooling where certain schools are trying, certain education institutions are trying to create those kind of environments. But that requires a reworking of a power structure. And the other aspect of that is that what you've got is with another aspect then of that is that home educated children have a much less have a lot more power to annoy the hell out of their parents, because I'm a home educated parent and I can say that, than kids have, right? And they can almost strike, they can complain, they can whine, they can sulk, They can do things that in school we get them sent to the office kind of thing, in order to have things like their books.
Because in school you need to keep structure. You can't, if one kid is doing that, it disrupts everyone.
It disrupts the whole class, right?
Yes. So you have to have discipline in that level. But in a home educational environment, there are fewer kids. So it's more possible to engage in that kind of way with children. And that's not even saying the teachers are bad or evil or anything. It's just they have to keep order. And for that reason,
That's the nature of the power structure. And I think there's a simple acid test. Lots of home educated kids have said to their parents, I don't like this textbook. I don't like my tutor. I don't like this. I don't like that. I want to do it this way. Just ask yourself at school, can you say, I'm going into grade 6. I don't like Mrs. Jones. The response of most parents to that is very simple. They say, well, you maybe get a better teacher next year. You just have to put up with it this year. And then the acid test that I always put there, and then the real acid test is to say, if you went into school and said, I actually don't like the school textbook. I don't like the textbook we've been given for geography.
You can't get another one.
How does that get changed? You can't get another one. How does that get changed, right? Whereas in home education, and I can promise you, because I can show you all of the expenses. In fact, there's a whole lot of them lying in my floor. That's what we're doing in COVID-19, going through all the textbooks that I've been told, you spent 500 Rand on this book and now I don't like it. I'm going through all of those books, but yeah, okay. So I think
just to end it off, we can just say, you can be indoctrinated anywhere, but a home education environment is sort of less likely to do it accidentally, whereas a school could almost do it accidentally easily. And that's sort of what you should remember. Yeah.
And you should and apply the textbook test. Think about the textbook test. Right.
Okay, great. Next one. The first thing I must do when I begin to home educate is choose a curriculum.
So you what do you think?
Well, that's not a good idea.
Did you do that?
I think let's say you were in school for a lot. Your parents. I'm talking to the parents. Your kids have been in school for a while, and you're going to start home educating. And the first thing you do is pick a curriculum, right? So let's go back to what the most important or the most valuable thing about home education is. Sort of it's ace in the hole is the fact that you can tailor the educational program to your children, which will help each child to learn in the way that's best for them, right? You just throw that out the window if you just immediately pick a curriculum, because now you're going to feel like you have to follow it, or maybe you're going to not follow it, then you've wasted money. So wait a little bit, get to know your kid, get to know what they like, and sort of what approach for education will work best for them, and then pick a curriculum. If you already know what they need, maybe they have to write matric next year, then maybe you should pick quickly, right? Because then they have to write. You need to follow some curriculum to have an official curriculum, but maybe they're 8 years old, right? Let them explore a bit and make an informed decision about it. Don't just say you think you have to do it immediately, because if they lose a week of schooling, they're going to be behind forever. Don't worry, they won't be.
Yeah, and so I think it's about a risk-adjusted strategy. So the point is that you can be in one of two states. Either you know your children very well, which I think is very few of us, or you don't know your children. If you don't know your children very well, and most of us don't really, and children change over time, then the approach, then it's good to use a low-risk approach and invest in finding out what they do or do not like, or what would work or not work for them, rather than making a kind of big bang decision first, a big bucks decision first, and then trying to fit your child into that situation. So the point is, if you really know your children, you then know the methodology for them. I think the vast majority of us don't, including myself in that. And what you do then is you use a risk-adjusted strategy. So you invest as you get more certain about what you require. And of course that becomes, so when you get towards matric, then you're going to have to invest in certain things. If you want to go to matric, if you want to do matric and go to university, you're going to invest in certain things. But the point is you're doing that much later in the process. Don't front load your educational investment.
Yeah.
Let it develop naturally as you go.
Yeah.
Let's do another one.
Yeah, let's continue. It's fine.
Yeah, let's do another one. Yeah, I think we killed that one.
You can't be homeschooled and do sport. False. I wrestled very competitively, national level, throughout my school career, basically. And because you can compete through clubs, I played tennis. Some of the sports it's difficult to compete. So tennis it was difficult to compete. So I just played for fun. I couldn't compete. So that's something that is true. And you'll have to find out about if you're into really specifically to some sport. Just do the research, figure out can this be done competitively through home education. But all sports can be done as a home educator, and a lot of them actually can be done competitively. So just check for the specific sport you're very interested in, and you can do lots of different sports as a home educator. Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of issues. One is that some people are already very focused on a sport, actually home educated, so they can pursue it.
Yes,
but I
that's
think
true.
I think what we've lost is the sense of doing sport for fun. And not so that I'm going to be in the first team and be the next Tiger Woods or the next multi-million rugby player or the next top cricket player. And I think there's great value to, even like you're saying, you did tennis and you did it for fun. There's great value just to doing sport for fun, because that's the future. That's the future audience of educated people who will go and watch that sport. So what we're seeing today is when we look around, this is for all the sporting codes who aren't including home educators and people who want to do sports for fun. But my message to them is, if you look around your stadium and you see they're empty, one of the reasons is that you're focusing everything on that high performance group. That's great, and that may help you to have a winning team. But if you don't engage people with your sport throughout their ages, you're not going to have people who are going to actually want to come and attend your events.
Yeah.
And if it's just going to be on TV, well, then I can sit there and surf between whatever's.
Yeah. And if you haven't played it intensely and you really love it, then you'd prefer to just watch it on TV.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, why should I watch a tennis match rather than a music video? If I don't know anything about tennis, if I've never been exposed to tennis, and I've never been given the chance to play tennis. So, but yeah.
A final point would be basically every home educator I knew in my entire life, and there's a lot of them, they did some sport. So there are lots of sports you can do.
Okay,
great.
So it's clearly a myth, and we've busted it.
Yeah, great. Let's continue.
Let's see.
We should do this one last, I think, because we're going to talk long about it. I'll bring it up next, but let's do this one now. Parents can't teach. Christopher, maybe you're a parent, so...
So I should answer that. Yeah, no, I agree. Parents can't teach. From my personal experience, like that. No, you know what the problem is that I think we have a misunderstanding of what we mean by teaching. We spoke about it a little bit earlier. Is that if you think that teaching, and it's linked to indoctrination, if you think that, so teaching is a lot like being a doctor. The point is that children naturally learn. So for the child to, the child is, you can have, so in this world, you can divide many things that involve men's work into two things. Those things which are purely, so this is quite philosophical, so you'll have to give me a minute, but those things which are purely the work of men. So a painting is purely the work of man, right? There's no, nature doesn't ever tend towards paintings. You won't have a tornado go through a lumber yard or through a forest, and then suddenly you get a Starbucks store or a Seattle. Okay, a tornado can't rip through a Starbucks store and then, rip through
but perhaps the tornado can take the Starbucks store out, and that might be a good thing.
okay. But let's just, for Starbucks, the way the things are going, then maybe, but let's just rather be Starbucks and not attack them. Let's just say a coffee shop, and just say something like a tornado or a hurricane can't go through a forest and have a Starbucks store or leave it behind, in its wake, be left behind, because that is a work purely of it's a purely human work, like a painting. Although some of these paintings that we see these days is a different issue, but maybe you could have that. But let's go on, and let's just say. But the point is that the child has a natural disposition to learn, just like the body has a natural disposition to be healthy. So what teaching is just like the doctor, helping the development of the body through applying medicines or giving a sound advice on a healthy diet. Teaching is like that. So yes, every parent can be a teacher, because what every parent is doing is saying, children learn naturally,
Mm.
and then what we do as teachers is we act like doctors for education. We give the child the vitamins, the balanced diet, all of the things that are needed to develop the mind. Now, so that's I think the point is that. But if you think that education is something that's just delivered into the child, that it's something that's like a work of man almost, and I think that's one of the problems with modern education systems. So we see this in this debate, which says you can't miss out 6 months of education; you'll be behind forever.
So
what presupposes is you can't learn by yourself. That no learning is happening if something isn't being poured in, or something it's not being literally indoctrinated.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long one, but it's a philosophical
point.
It's
a good one. It's a good one. Here's another angle on it, right? So if you, again, let's use the goal kind of thing, right? If your goal is to have someone spit out back to you a bunch of facts, right? And you want it to be easy to test, right? Then you want everyone to know the same things, and you want it to be the things you gave them, exactly what you gave them, because then you can test them easily, because then you know it's right or it's wrong, right? If you try to get them to go beyond you, to do things you haven't done before, or act without, in some situation which you have not seen before, you have to use a different approach, right? So if I'm going to try to teach a child to solve a maze, there are two approaches I could do. I could just tell them, if I know the maze, I could just tell them, okay, turn left, turn right, and get them to memorize the little sequence of steps they have to take to get from the one side to the other, okay? But if I don't know what the maze is going to be they're going to face, I have to use an approach which is different, which allows them to learn how to do it without the pre-knowledge that I gave them, okay? So it's a fact. Let's put it this way. Most parents can't teach exactly like a teacher can, because they didn't train to be a teacher. So we agree with that. But we still believe that parents can teach their children in a different manner, but in a manner that is very, very effective. And let me give an example of that. An example would be the robotics competitions that I competed in. These are international level competitions. Hundreds of thousands of kids right across the world compete in this. And at the moment, there's actually a large body of South African schools who also start competing in this in the World Robot Olympiad. There is a very clear trend in the winning teams, the teams that win in South Africa and the teams who win internationally. And the fact is that, the fact of these teams is they were not taught in a pour-in manner. They were taught in a way where a coach guided them, and they designed the whole robot by themselves basically, and had some guidance along the road. And a lot of these, disproportionate percentage of these kids who are doing well at these are home educators, because they've got time at home to build their robots and play around and learn by themselves. My parents did not teach me anything about my robot. I could build a robot, and my friend could build a robot, Johnny. We could program it because we built the thing from the ground up, and we ran into the problems ourselves. So we could solve a different maze if we got it. If we got we weren't prepped like some of the kids with one specific thing, and if anything went wrong, they're shot, right? And things go wrong in the real world. You don't know what your child's going to face in their lives. You cannot just pour it into them and expect them to be able to handle, to just have exactly what you told them is going to happen. So if you want to encourage that kind of self-problem solving from the child's perspective, a natural learning approach is better, because that is an approach where the child can learn to learn in effect, right? So the goal of the home educator is different. It's not to say, I'm going to teach this specific batch of material to my child. The goal is different. The goal is to say, I'm going to guide my child to learn different kinds of things from other people and from me, and learn how to learn and to act in the world, to solve the maze of life. And so it's not about like being a math teacher. The parent doesn't just have to teach math. The parent wants to prepare the child in every facet, right? So yes, some math assistance, some math videos, some math work will be done. But if the parent isn't comfortable with math, they can use other resources like free resources, or even get friends to help. The point is, you're not a teacher. You're a facilitator of education. You're guiding your child. And some things you'll teach and some things you'll outsource.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good point, and I think the issue is also comes down to, I think that it's very important also to think about, and I think I've actually lost it. So let's carry on. Let's do another one out the job.
Let me
We'll
just
come back.
restate
I'll make
a
a
quick
next one.
summary. Yes, parents aren't exactly the same as teachers. They don't have the same training. They're not going to stand in front of a class and teach a class. That's not the goal. The goal is for them to teach a few kids, their own kids, maybe 5 of them, right? If you've got a big family, sometimes 5 at a time, right? Because then some of them will already be out, and if you've even got a bigger family, the point is it'll be a small group. So we're not saying these home educators can go and replace some teacher in a school and just do the teaching there. No, we're not saying that. That's not that. Most of them won't be able to do that, but they can teach their children and facilitate their children's learning because it's more natural, it's more hands-on, and it's more guidance, and it's a smaller group.
And so I've just remembered what I wanted to say is, and I have arguments with people who have a lot of who do more curricular-based approaches. The problem is that over time, every curriculum, even if it's trying to teach thinking, inevitably is systemically the way you crack the curriculum. There's a formula to it. So when I was a kid at school, I learned to speak Afrikaans in a quite a natural environment, and I was actually fluent in Afrikaans, not anymore.
Yeah, which we should speak Afrikaans then, eh?
No, don't start talking now. There was a system called but someone developed a system called Met Underwoord system, and it literally was so someone had cracked the syllabus. And I can say even at every curriculum that I've seen, Cambridge, whatever, CAPS, whatever curriculum, always, unless it's very individualized, there's a system and you can crack the system. And eventually, if you want to do well in that curriculum, you get taught how to crack the system rather than how to learn. Let's go on, because we took a long time on that.
Great. Last one.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, so we made it through. It's
the jar's empty. Okay,
we can
so
put
give us the
something
last
else
one.
in here now. There are no cons to home education.
Yeah, well, this is where you're supposed to do the job interview. I don't know if you had to do job interviews, and I always ask you, what are your weaknesses?
I work too hard.
My weakness, exactly. My weakness is I work too hard.
I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah. No, so let's avoid the I work too hard. I'm a perfectionist. I really respect my boss as your weakness.
I never say no.
I never say no. What are the real cons of home education? What are the real cons of home education? So a couple of them. Let's say that it can be. Oh well, let's go through some of them. One of them is that you actually have to have a lot more legal knowledge and understand a whole lot of more legal issues if you're home educating than if you're in school. That's a con. Because you have to spend time sifting through all of these complicated things. People get very upset about it. That's one con. What's another con? There is an opportunity cost to home education, where even though it may be cheap in terms of money going in, it can be very expensive depending on the opportunity cost. But that's a decision that you have to take. Home education can be, in a broad sense, hard, but everything that is valuable in life is hard. Parenting is hard, but that doesn't mean that lots of people are saying, well, some people are saying that, but that's great, that's good for you. I'm not going to parent just because parenting is hard. So there are sacrifices that have to be made. There are difficulties. We're talking about parents being teachers. Let's just use a quick one here, is to say, a parent couldn't be necessarily, not every parent can be a teacher in the sense of standing in front of a class and giving a lesson on maths or science or geography. But every parent can be a school principal. Every parent can be a school principal, using other resources, working with their children to find those resources. So that can be a demanding role. I don't know if you can think of any other cons of home education.
Okay, look, I'd say a con for some people would be the fact that it requires you to give up lots of things you would be doing otherwise with your time, right? Because it does take your time. Let's say your kids were in school and you're a mom and you only work half day. That other half day when your kids aren't home, it's different.
Oh, you're in trouble. Did you just say mom and only work half day in the same sentence?
Well, let's.
Moms work. Let me tell you, moms work
No,
all
what
the
I'm
time,
saying,
every day. No, I know you don't mean.
not
I know you
not.
don't mean it, but I'm just
No,
saying you
what I'm.
just stepped into trouble.
Yeah, it can
Your
sound
mom is
wrong. It
coming.
can sound wrong.
Your,
Yes, they
your
work
mom
at
is
all
going to come
times.
and grab you.
They work at all times. I agree, but I'm pointing out. Let's say you have that. I'm saying there are some 2 hours left when your kids aren't home. Let's say that, and you could usually use that for something else. Let's just imagine that for a moment. Now you've got that as well taken away, in a sense,
Right.
which you now
So
have
it's
to
a
spend
sacrifice.
educating. Yes, it's a amount of time that you have to sacrifice. Maybe there's some social engagements that you're part of. I don't know, right? Which now you don't have time for anymore because of this, right? And so there's it's a personal sacrifice you have to make of your time,
Well,
and that would be a con, right?
I think the point is that it's personal sacrifice that you choose to make. Let's put
And that's it depends on what you decide to do with your time, and obviously you're going to sacrifice something. And another con would be the example it might be, if you're staying far away from other people, that it is going to be harder to have interaction with friends for your children, and children like also playing with people their own age, right? So we were talking previously about you would be socialized with across the board, but children still like having friends, and it's going to take more work. So if your children are in school, you can tell them, oh, but you saw your friends at school yesterday. But now my brothers and sisters say we want to go and visit someone, and then you have to organize that visit, right? So that also takes time. My mom was driving the whole time from one sporting event to another, and moms in school do it as well. But yeah.
But that's extra, and this is basic. So you have to be, so particularly where perhaps you've got a very small family and you could be, and you're in an isolated area, that may be difficult. But also, I think nowadays, I mean, I'm not trying to do the negating the cons necessarily, but nowadays you have got the internet, you have got, and the home education community is much larger. So that chance to find people of your same age as you is much greater than it was perhaps when you started homeschooling. So I think we've handled those.
And I'm going to put up another con for people to think about, right? And this is one of those which you sort of can say can be solved. It's almost an interview con, because this is something which I don't necessarily think happens with most home educators, but it can happen if you approach it a little bit wrong. And that is the fact that you can stay too much. You can keep the children too much in their own comfort zones for too long, right? Which also can happen in other areas, but this is definitely a problem in home education. That can be a con that you have. If you don't if you just try to keep everything at home and you don't have any other engagements, it's going to be a problem to some extent. If you right, so if you still are being challenged and you're pushing your boundaries, right? That's fine. But this is a concern
let me. I mean, we can unpack that maybe another time in more detail. But let me sort of perhaps jump in there and just add something to that. Is that part of that could be part of the natural home education process, because children have so much power. So they can cry and throw a tantrum, which they would never do at school and they'd never do in front of their friends. If they don't want to write a particular exam or do a particular thing on a particular day. And that can wear parents down. So that is a con, because you don't have, a principal, and you don't have that sort of social pressure of the school where the kids are not going to, where kids are not necessarily forced by it. I think Marika was giving us but that can also correct itself. And Marika was giving us a lovely example about her not doing maths for a year and a half. But they would never be allowed at school. Let's be honest.
But now she's studying math, right? So that's it worked out well.
But the point is that her sister then created the pressure on her to actually go and do that. So I think that's that. But what that demonstrates is the extent of the power that children have, And that can be that. So the con with home education not really is about it's not always, or I don't even think predominantly, the domineering parent. It's actually the children who have the power, and they can exercise that against the parent. And parents have to watch that, and sometimes have to step back a little bit and be willing to play that more, let's call it, forceful role. And then maybe as a role, also, in most families, that's also a role for dad sometimes, right? Because mom maybe is very engaged in it, and then the dad has to kind of step in and perhaps do the principal. But I think let's maybe wrap it up over there if we can.
Yes. I think that's a good place to end. I think we should come back to the cons, because I don't think any of these cons are systemic. They're not entirely impossible to negate, to move around, but it's going to be person specific. So perhaps we should have a conversation about in which situation could there be a con, because it's really hard for me to think of an actual con right now, because everyone I think of, people have solved in their own different ways. And if I think of a con, it's going to be some specific family that I think did something wrong. And it's not so easy to talk about that. So
So let's come back and we'll do that another time. But I think we have at least shown that there are some cons, and we've added some balance. So do you want to close us out? You want to close this video?
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us and then finishing the jug with us. I just threw it back, but it's really empty. And so hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and and then the little bell next to it if you want to get notifications when we post another video. And if you want to ask some more questions, make some more statements in the comments, we could maybe address them in a future time if we get enough of them in the jar and Jar of Controversy. So then we can play this game again.
Fill up the Jar of Controversy, and we'll see if they're myths that we can bust. So thanks to everyone for watching and or listening.
Great.
Have a great evening and stay safe. Go well.
Okay. Bye.